My name is Elara Wyn, 34 years old. The hallway smelled like hairspray, spilled juice, and the metallic tang of nerves, a carnival of sequins and parental breathing exercises that never quite filled their lungs. Backstage, the benches were weapons or altars, depending on how you felt about 9-year-olds under lights. My mother arrived early, floating as if the air itself made room for her. 2 identical thermoses hugged in the crook of her arm like holy relics she'd smuggled from a friendlier universe. "I made lucky tea," she announced, setting the thermoses down with the ceremony of someone placing expensive crystal. "Chamomile and honey for focus. Sip, sweetheart." Her smile was wide, but the muscles in her jaw had that small, hummingbird tremor I knew from storms and holidays. Chloe stood still in her sparkly costume while I fixed the last stubborn hairpin. Across from us, Emily fluttered around Lily like a stage manager with a stopwatch for a heart. "Lift your chin, baby. No, softer. Good." The coach barked counts. Music bled through the door in pops and bass. I shifted our bag to make space on the bench, a thoughtless scrape of canvas against metal, and nudged the 2 thermoses apart so my mother could pour without elbowing anyone. "This one's for Lily. This one's for Chloe," Mom said, tapping lids as if blessing them. Emily called her over to fix a crooked bow, and she drifted away, hairpins between her teeth, the small queen of small things. When she returned, I was tying Chloe's shoe. Mom reached for the farther thermos, why the farther, and unscrewed it carefully, poured a pale stream into the lid. The steam smelled honey-sweet, with a darker note beneath it, like a basement in summer. "Drink it, sweetheart. It's good for you," she said, her hand unsteady. "You're the one who needs it," I joked, not looking up. "You're more nervous than she is." She froze, eyes cutting to mine, a quick, sharp flicker as if I'd said a password she hadn't expected to hear. "You're right," she said finally, too casual. She brought the lid to her mouth and sipped. Then she took another, smaller sip, like she was appeasing something inside herself that always demanded one more. For a few minutes, life pretended to be life. Lily practiced her arms, Chloe rolled her shoulders, Emily talked strategy in a whisper. The coach clapped in threes. Then my mother sat down. She pressed her hand to her sternum as if feeling for a doorbell that wouldn't ring. Color bled out of her cheeks. "Mom," I said. "Dizzy," she whispered, and tried to stand, knees buckling as if strings had been cut. The coach's voice sliced the air. "Water! Nurse!" And then the backstage world shattered into jagged commands. Someone thrust a bottle into my hand. Someone else shouted for an ambulance. Emily's phone was already at her ear, her face flattened into a calm that meant fear. Chloe and Lily looked at my mother with the awe kids reserve for adults failing in public. "Grandma," Chloe said, small and fierce and scared. "She'll be fine," I heard myself say, the sentence as automatic as tying a shoe. "Go warm up. Everything's okay." The paramedics arrived 5 eternal minutes later, their presence like punctuation at the end of a too-long sentence. They strapped my mother to a stretcher, the tape crossing the glitter of a fallen sequin on her robe. "I'll go with her," Emily announced, grabbing her bag, already shepherding the situation into the shape she preferred. "You stay with the girls." The door swallowed them. The hallway's hum returned. I smoothed Chloe's sleeve and swallowed the taste of honey that had somehow leaked into the air between us. The show went on. The world always does. Music, applause, feet like rain. I watched from the wing, muscles locked in place, my eyes on my daughter and also on a closed door miles away. Chloe danced like the stage was a friend. Lily danced like the stage was a test. When the announcer called it, Chloe's name rose and fell in a wave, and she looked for me with that foolish, perfect belief that everything is exactly what it seems. I was proud. Not hungry proud or scoreboard proud. Just proud of a person I loved doing something she loved without flinching. "You were radiant," I told her, hugging sequins and hairspray and effort, and for a flicker I thought, I can't wait to tell Mom. I called Emily from the hallway. "She won," I said stupidly, like the words might loosen something in my chest. "Is Mom okay? Should I come to the hospital?" A pause. "Congratulations," Emily said, and even the recording on her voice sounded tired. "No need. It's blood pressure. She's fine. Resting." Fine. Resting. 2 words on a Post-it that you slap over a crack in a dam. I packed the costumes, slipped both thermoses into my bag. The lid clicked like a decision, and took the girls home. They watched cartoons on the couch, trophy between them like a small golden animal. I stood in the kitchen with the thermoses on the counter and tried not to think. The refrigerator hummed. The air felt crowded with honey. Somewhere, a clock decided to be louder than usual. I told myself tea is tea, dizziness is dizziness, age is age. I told myself coincidence happens all the time. That's its whole job. By morning, coincidence had lost its argument. The hospital's fluorescent hallway was the color of fatigue. My mother smiled too brightly. Blood pressure, she said, as if naming something dismisses it. You know how doctors are. Her eyes sat slightly off mine like birds on a wire that didn't trust the wind. A young doctor with careful hands and a voice practiced at delivering storms appeared at the foot of the bed. Your mother is stable, he said, eyes on the monitor as if numbers could be comfort. Her reaction is unusual. It looks like intoxication, but we can't say from what. I felt my mouth answer before my brain. She had her herbal tea, homemade. He nodded, professional neutral, sliding into something a degree more intent. If you can bring a sample, we'll run a toxicology screen. It takes a couple of days. We'd like to rule things out. He paused, meeting my gaze fully now. If a child had consumed it, depending on the compound and dose, it could be dangerous. How dangerous? My voice did that thing where it tries to climb out of a room and fails. Anywhere from excessive drowsiness to loss of consciousness, he said, gentler. In some cases, respiratory or cardiac issues. That's broad. I don't want to alarm you prematurely. Please bring the sample. I nodded, felt my fingers find the strap of my bag as if to keep me from falling through the floor. I will. On the way back to my mother's room, I passed a cart of neatly stacked cups, lids lined like soldiers. When I stepped inside, she pretended to read a newspaper, eyes moving too fast to be tethered to meaning. Everything okay? She asked. Doctor says you got off easy, I said. See? Her smile tightened. You worry too much. When she lied to us as children, she'd squint like the light had turned unkind. She squinted now. I did not ask why. I did not ask if her hands had trembled when she measured herbs, if she'd misread a label, if she'd gotten tired and decided tired things are close enough to good. I kissed her forehead. Rest, I said. In the hallway, I pressed my back to the wall and watched a janitor push a quiet machine that made the floor look more honest than it was. That night, I lay awake on the edge of the world and listened to my daughter breathe. Between each small exhale, the house seemed to hold its breath, too. Twice this year, Chloe had gotten sick on the eve of competitions. One stomach, one dizziness, and we'd blamed nerves or bad cafeteria chicken. The memory rose like a hand from dark water. My mother's sighing commentary on money, on fairness, on the difference between paid studio and after-school group. I had always paid what needed paying. Property taxes when Mom forgot, insurance top-ups, Emily's alternator when her car died, and then forgot that I'd paid it. I thought I was generous. Maybe I was just convenient. At 3 a.m, I got up, padded to the kitchen, and opened the bag. The stainless steel reflected my face back at me, distorted, 2 of me where one should be. I unscrewed one lid, sniffed, recoiled. Honey, chamomile, and a bitter undertow that didn't belong in anyone's childhood. I closed it, washed my hands, washed them again. In the morning, I took both thermoses to the hospital lab. The technician labeled them with numbers that made them less mine. We'll call, she said. Driving home, I stopped at a red light that lasted centuries and realized my hands were clenched so hard around the wheel that my knuckles were white as receipts. Across the intersection, a girl Chloe's size skipped in a uniform, backpack slapping her spine. Her mother reached out to steady her at the curb. I watched that hand hover, open, close. At home, Chloe held up her trophy and grinned. Grandma will be proud, she said. She will, I lied, or maybe told a truth from a version of the world that had expired in the last 24 hours. That evening, I tucked Chloe into bed and sat in the dark beside her, counting breaths, until the smell of honey finally left the day. When her chest rose and fell evenly, I got up, went to the kitchen, and moved the thermoses from the counter to a high cabinet I never used. The metal chimed softly against wood, the sound of something being put away that would refuse to stay quiet. If a child had drunk that, I whispered into the cupboard's dark, not to anyone, not even to myself. I left the door open a fraction, as if air could dilute memory. In the morning, I would start asking questions I couldn't unmask. The results didn't come the next morning. They came as a silence that followed me around the kitchen, sat on the rim of my coffee mug, and watched me miss 2 green lights because my brain was still in a fluorescent corridor where numbers blinked and wouldn't tell me what they meant. By noon, the house had the stale smell of waiting. I wiped a perfectly clean counter and put my keys in my pocket the way you put a word on your tongue to remember it. My mother's house keeps its own weather. Even the air near the porch feels older, like it's been instructed not to hurry. The front door stuck the way it always had when humidity made the wood swell. I shouldered it, stepped into that museum of framed school photos and porcelain angels, and called out, "It's me." The clock in the hallway answered. In the kitchen, light fell through the sheer curtains in squares that made the table look like a chessboard nobody knew how to win. "I'll make lunch," I called, already opening cabinets without looking like I was opening cabinets. Jars lined the shelves in a tidy militia, every label carefully printed, some labels rewritten in my mother's hand when the store's type was too small for her new eyes. Lavender, chamomile, valerian, lemon balm. Everything with a purpose. Everything a promise. And then the promise without a name. Back left corner, tucked where a person would put a thing they still want near but don't want to see. An unlabeled jar, squatted like a secret. I lifted it and felt the whisper of tackiness under its base, as if it had once told people what it was and then been taught to forget. I loosened the lid, brought it close, and the scent hit me. Not tea, not kitchen, something sharper, medicinal with a metallic aftertaste that didn't belong in any cup. I put it down as gently as I could. My hands remembered they were mine, and not instruments in a movie. On the shelf, tucked against the backboard, a brown paper edge caught my eye. I slid it free, the torn corner of a label, gummy with old glue. I pressed the paper to the side of the jar. The torn teeth matched. Enough of the printing remained to read the part the world should never need a warning for. Not for children, for external use only. My body did that tiny flinch you do when the obvious finally introduces itself. I reached into my tote, pulled out a snack-sized plastic bag I'd thrown in, because the future had felt shapeless and I wanted something with edges. I took a little of the powder with a spoon from the drawer, tipped it into the bag, sealed it, and felt ridiculous standing in my mother's kitchen measuring harm like a baker. "What are you doing?" I spun. My mother stood in the doorway in her robe, hair flattened on one side, eyes too bright in the way of people who want you to know they've just woken up and therefore couldn't possibly be responsible for anything. She looked at the jar, then at my hand, then at my face. Taking a sample, I said, "I want to know what this is." She pushed her lips together the way she does when a cashier counts change too slowly. "Why are you acting like a policeman in my house, Elara? It's herbs. People act like everything is poison. Doctors love to scare you." I set the jar on the table, put the torn label next to it like a photo lineup. This said not for children. External use only. Someone scrubbed it. Grubbed. She crossed the room, took the paper, squinted. "Old jar," she pronounced, as if that settled the matter. "I reuse. I'm not made of money." "Then what's inside?" I said. "Lavender blend, for nerves." She plucked the jar up and turned it, presenting its blank glass, the way a magician shows you a hat before he pulls the wrong thing out. "Honestly, you spend your life in front of computers and suddenly you're an expert on plants." "Not an expert," I said softly. "I'm a mother." We stood in the kitchen, with the refrigerator, humming the neutral song. Appliances sing when they're pretending not to witness anything. I reached into my bag and unfolded the lab request, the neat boxes with their promises of answers. I placed it on the table. "I brought your tea to the hospital. They'll call me." She set the jar down too quickly, the base clacking against wood. "So now strangers will decide if I'm allowed to make tea for my own family." "Strangers who can tell me what's in this," I said, tapping the blank glass. "If it's harmless, then good. If it's not, then I need to understand why." She moved closer, close enough that I could smell the faint perfume she always wore to hospital appointments, as if dignity came in a bottle and insurance didn't cover it. "You think I would hurt Chloe?" Not a question. Something between a dare and a prayer. "I think Chloe got sick twice before competitions," I said, trying to keep my voice where it belonged. I think your hands shake. I think labels are small. I think sometimes we tell ourselves a story about fairness, and it makes other stories possible. Her face pinched, then dropped the expression like a thing that had never fit. She glanced past me to the window, as if the maple tree could volunteer an alibi. You talk like court television, she said. It's chamomile and honey, that's all. Then let the lab say so, I replied. The doorbell rang, a bright domestic sound that didn't match the rest of the scene. My mother made a small, exasperated noise and shuffled out. I heard the scrape of the bolt, the swing of wood, and then Emily's voice pitched in that too-high care she uses on nurses and waiters. How are you feeling? I brought fruit. I didn't move the jar. I didn't move anything. I waited. When they came in, Emily's smile paused like a recording buffering. Her eyes flicked to the table, to the torn label, to the plastic bag in my hand. Her eyebrows rose and then flattened, one practiced motion. What's this? She asked, in the voice of someone who already knows what this is and would prefer you didn't. A sample, I said, for testing. Emily looked at Mom. Mom looked at Emily. For a blink, there it was. Two people choosing which story they were going to tell, which Stoker they'd both pretend to see. Anna, Emily started, using my childhood nickname. She only resurrects when she wants to make me smaller. You're taking this too far. Mom buys everything from the pharmacy. She probably mixed up a jar. You know how she reuses things. External use only isn't tea, I said, and slid the torn paper towards Emily with two fingers like a dealer who'd rather not be doing this job. Emily skimmed it too fast, as if speed could unprint letters. Labels are wrong all the time, she said brightly, a sentence that meant nothing, and knew it. I lifted my phone, opened the camera, and took 3 photos. The jar, the torn label, the experimental bag. Click, click. The noise sounded rude in this room, like bringing weather into a library. Don't, my mother said, voice suddenly low. Put that away. We'll handle our business and our family. That's what I'm doing, I said. Handling our business so a 9-year-old doesn't collapse because adults don't want to be embarrassed. The word embarrassed landed like a cracked plate. Emily set the fruit on the counter with a controlled thud. You don't get to talk to her like that, she said. She's your mother. And Chloe is my daughter, I answered. I'm not accusing. I'm verifying. That's worse, my mother snapped. Accusing at least believes in something. Verifying is when you think love is a trick. I wanted to tell her love isn't the absence of verification. Love is why you verify. Instead, I picked up the notebook lying beside the microwave, a small soft-covered thing with a rubber band around it, the kind my mother used for grocery lists and birthdays. The rubber band snapped my fingers in its hurry to be in the past. I flipped it open and stopped on a page where a bent paperclip marked a place. 3 dates, neat and practical as shopping days. The first 2 were last year, the third was last week. Next to each, a set of numbers, drops, times of day. After the first, evening, stomach next day. After the second, morning, dizziness, last 24H. After the third, before performance, sleepy. What is this? I asked, my voice doing the opposite of what panic demands and going quiet. Recipes, my mother said. Notes, so I remember how to help. Help, I repeated softly and felt the room tilt. Help who? The girls, she said. And then her mouth went thin, as if the syllables had betrayed her. I held the notebook open toward Emily. Her eyes skimmed, then skipped. You're connecting dots that don't belong together, she said too quickly. It's herbs. Everyone has side effects written in books. That's normal. Side effects, I said. Dizziness, sleepiness, scheduled. My mother put out her hand. Give it back. I'm taking it to someone who can translate your helpfulness, I said, and slid the notebook into my bag, the paper loud against the nylon. You're going to the police against your own mother? Emily's voice was a hiss now. The careful brightness cracked. I'm going to the truth, I said. If the truth says I've punished the wrong people, I'll apologize until the end of my life. If it says my child has been given sleep like medicine before competitions, I won't apologize to anyone. We stood there breathing at each other. Outside, a car door slammed and a dog barked as if the street were on a separate channel. My mother sat down hard in the wooden chair and pressed her fingers to her temples. I never meant harm, she said, the sentence dropping its anchor in the middle of the kitchen. I only meant calm. You push her so hard. She shakes. She shakes when adults hand her danger and call it love, I said, and surprised myself by not crying. Emily stepped closer, her hand a rigid wing between us. "This is getting cruel," she said. "Withdraw whatever you've done. We'll sort it. The family will sort it." The doorbell rang again, a second fruit basket of timing, but nobody moved. My mother's face did a strange thing, relief and fear in the same breath. She looked at Emily, and in that fractional, unguarded moment, the line between them was a single word I'd have missed on a different day. "Don't worry," she murmured. "We'll say she misunderstood. We can fix this." "We," I repeated, and the word found a seat in my suspicion. Good to know who's included. I zipped my bag. The zip's teeth made a sound that felt like a boundary. "I'll let the lab speak first," I said. "Then we'll let someone else decide what sorting looks like." I walked to the door. In the quiet that followed my steps, two whispers chased each other and fell exactly where I expected them to. "She'll ruin us," my mother said, brittle, and Emily answered, "Only if we let her." On the porch, the air felt new, as if it had never been in a kitchen before. I stood there and realized my hands were steady for the first time in days. The jar's smell clung to my sleeve, a reminder I couldn't launder yet. I took one breath for the girl at home with her trophy, one for the woman in the kitchen clutching a story, and one for the sister who had chosen a side and decided to call it love. Then I went to the car, set the notebook on the passenger seat like a person, and drove the evidence toward people whose relationship to me would be professional, not ancestral. If this was cruelty, it was the kind that keeps people alive. Tonight, I kept the house very still, as if silence could be a kind of safety until the phone rang and told me what the T already knew. The lab called on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning that looks harmless until you answer the phone. The technician's voice was calm, trained for neutral. "The tea contained a sedative compound," she said, "in concentrations unsafe for children. Even for adults on medication, it can cause a strong reaction." The room tilted, though nothing moved. "And if a child had drunk it?" I asked. There was a pause, professional sympathy finding its footing. "Best case, loss of consciousness. Worst case, we'd be talking about emergency intervention. You're lucky." Lucky. That word should never sound like that. I thanked her, hung up, and looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where Chloe had built castles from cereal boxes, where my mother once rolled dough and hummed the wrong lines to old songs. The walls stayed obediently still, but I could feel the house listening. The truth had a shape now, and it wasn't leaving. I spread everything on the table, the reports, the photos of the jar and its ghost label, the images of the notebook. Evidence instead of memories. It looked small, fragile, nothing like the noise inside me. That afternoon, I walked into the police station. The officer at the desk looked 50, kind in a way that didn't invite pity. He asked questions in measured tones. Dates, symptoms, who handled what, how many times the child had been ill before. I handed him the folder, my hand steady only because they'd had practice faking it. He flipped through the papers, one page whispering into the next. "We'll investigate," he said. "You did the right thing bringing this." The right thing never feels right at first. It feels like betrayal that won't apologize for itself. When I came home, Chloe was drawing dancers on the living room floor, pink pencils streaking across paper. She looked up, smiled the kind of smile that could rebuild whole cities, and asked, "Can we visit Grandma soon?" "No," I said, too fast. "Grandma's busy sorting things." "With what?" "Her herbs," I said. She nodded, perfectly satisfied, and bent back over her drawing. I watched her shoulders move and thought about every time I'd said everything's fine and how it had trained her to believe me. That night, I opened my laptop and canceled every monthly transfer to my mother's accounts. The pension top-ups, the utility auto-pays, the insurance I'd been covering, just until she gets back on her feet. There was no anger, just a clean silence in each click. The kind of silence that means a line has finally been drawn. The call started 2 days later. The first was my mother. Her voice carried the same tremor I'd heard backstage before she fainted. "How could you do this?" she demanded, then softened mid-sentence. "You called the police on your own mother. Do you want me to die in prison?" I said nothing at first, let her words scrape the air. "I would never hurt Chloe on purpose," she continued, tone bending between outrage and guilt. "You've always been dramatic, Elara, always looking for a villain when things go wrong." "Mom," I said quietly, "the lab found a sedative in the tea. Twice Chloe got sick before competitions. That's not drama." "You're ungrateful," she whispered. voice cracking into that trembling performance she'd used my whole childhood to end arguments. Good thing your father isn't alive to see this shame. Then her tone changed, sharp as a dropped knife. And the money. Did you stop the transfers? Yes. Silence. Then, almost a hiss. Fine. I don't need anything from you. You'll regret this when I'm gone. She hung up. The dial tone buzzed like a flat heartbeat. An hour later, Emily called. I let it ring twice, then answered because I already knew she'd keep trying. Elara, you have to stop this, she said without hello. Withdraw the complaint. You're going to kill her with stress. She almost killed my child with medicine, I replied. She made a mistake. She's old. Do you really want to be the reason our mother spends her last years in court? No, I said. I want to be the reason my daughter has the rest of hers. The line went dead. Days passed, blurred at the edges. The investigator called for follow-ups, wanting more detail. When Chloe first showed symptoms, what I'd seen in the kitchen, what the notebook contained, each conversation stripped another layer of disbelief from me. What had once sounded like accusation now sounded like documentation. By the second week, I stopped answering any call that wasn't the police. My phone still glowed with missed ones. Mom, Emily, unknown numbers that felt too familiar. The silence after each ring was its own kind of mercy. Then, 10 days later, the investigator called again. His voice was careful, the kind used for news that needs room. Ms. Wyn, he said, the case has been reclassified. Reclassified? From accidental poisoning to intentional harm to a minor. My heart made a sound I couldn't hear. Why? He hesitated. Your mother made a statement during questioning. She admitted to giving your daughter the substance intentionally, said it was meant to calm her before the performance. My mouth didn't move right away. She said that? She tried to retract it later, claimed she misspoke, that she'd confused one jar with another, but it's on record. We have to proceed accordingly. I closed my eyes. What did she mean by calm her down? Did she mention Lily? He exhaled into the line. She didn't name anyone else. Look, off the record, I've seen a lot. This is complicated. I'm sorry. The words came out small. Thank you for telling me. After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off. The documents, the photographs, the notebook, all the things that had once felt heavy enough to anchor the truth now seemed too light, like paper couldn't possibly hold what they contained. For a moment, I still wanted to believe it had been an accident, that maybe she'd said the wrong thing, that the truth had been edited by exhaustion or guilt. But wanting didn't make it true. By midnight, the air in the house was too still, the kind that feels like it's waiting for you to admit something. I went into Chloe's room and sat beside her bed. She was asleep, her hair sticking to her cheek, one hand clutching the corner of her blanket. You're safe, I whispered, though the word felt foreign now, like a language from another life. Her chest rose and fell, steady. I watched her breathe and thought about the space between one inhale and the next, the space where everything could change. I walked back to the kitchen, opened the cabinet where I'd hidden the thermoses. They were still there, stainless steel dull in the dark. I took one out and turned it in my hands. The metal was cold, indifferent, reflecting only the faint outline of my face. I thought about how many times I'd made tea in this house, how ordinary it had seemed to pour something warm and call it comfort. I put the thermos back and closed the cabinet. From now on, there would be no tea, not with honey, not without. I sat down at the table, pressed my palms against the wood, and realized that justice doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief that finally stopped pretending to be hope. Tomorrow, the case would move forward. My mother would be questioned again. Emily would call again. The world would go on. But something fundamental, the gravity that holds families together, had changed direction. And all I could think was, love shouldn't need to be tested in a lab to prove it isn't poison. The trial lasted 3 months, long enough for the seasons to shift, short enough that it still felt like I hadn't exhaled. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Everything smelled of disinfectant and dust, the kind that settles on forgotten promises. The walls were a tired beige. The benches creaked under the weight of people pretending not to judge. My mother sat at the front, her hair too neat, her hands folded like she was in church, not court. Emily hovered beside her, all anxious grace, clutching a tissue she never used. When they read the charge, intentional harm to a minor, my mother didn't flinch. She just blinked slowly, as if the air itself were uncooperative. I sat behind the barrier, watching. Not as a daughter, not anymore, but as a witness who'd spent her life mistaking patience for love. The prosecutor was young, nervous at first, then steady. He walked the jury through the lab reports, the notebook, the labeled jar, the confession, the retraction. Each word landed like a soft hammer. The defense leaned on age, frailty, eyesight, confusion. A loving grandmother who mixed her remedies, they said. No malice, just error. When they called me to the stand, my heart behaved itself. I told them what happened backstage, the tea, the collapse, the investigation. I told them about the jar, the notebook, the lab results. I kept my voice level, but when I reached the part about Chloe, if she had drunk it, the words snagged, just once. The judge nodded kindly, as if kindness were currency here. I stepped down, sat back in my chair, and stared at the empty cup of water on the table. It looked absurdly like a metaphor. 2 days later, the verdict arrived. Guilty. The sentence, 2 years probation, medical supervision, no contact with my daughter. Too gentle, maybe. Too human. But I didn't protest. Justice isn't an instrument tuned for satisfaction. It just plays what it can. Emily walked free. No proof she'd known, no evidence she'd done anything but stand by her mother. Her relief was a sigh loud enough to fill the room. When the judge dismissed us, she turned once toward me, as if to say something, but the words stayed on her side of the air. Outside, the world had the nerve to be sunny. Reporters didn't come. There was no headline, no spectacle, just the faint smell of exhaust and the steady, indifferent rhythm of traffic. Weeks passed like the hum of an appliance you forget to turn off. My mother moved back to her house. Emily took Lily and left the city, though she still called occasionally. Messages that began with, "You destroyed this family," and ended with, "She's your mother, Elara." I stopped replying. Chloe started dancing again. At first she was tentative, every stretch cautious, every twirl interrupted by glances at me. "You sure it's okay?" she'd ask. I always said yes, even when I wasn't sure of anything. But over time, she found rhythm again, in her body, in laughter, in ordinary mornings. Watching her practice became the one place my heart didn't ache. One evening, I sat by the window and looked through the folder the court had returned. The official seal, the verdict, the medical notes, all of the ways love had been translated into paperwork. And beneath them, a photograph. Me, Emily, and Mom at a picnic years ago. Mom in the middle, her arms around us both, smiling like the sun was something she'd personally invented. I kept staring at that face, the same one that had scolded and soothed, poured tea and poison with the same hands. I didn't hate her. That was the worst part. Hate would have been simpler, cleaner. What I felt was exhaustion, the kind that has learned to live beside forgiveness, but doesn't dare touch it. A month later, a letter arrived. My mother's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. I almost didn't open it. Inside, "Elara, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I only wanted to help. Things got confused, and you turned it into a war, but I pray you sleep at night. Tell Chloe I love her. Mom." No apology, just rearranged guilt. I folded the letter and placed it in the same envelope with the old photo, a record of what love looks like when it forgets its shape. The months blurred again. Sometimes I'd pass a pharmacy shelf and see those brown jars lined up like soldiers, and my chest would tighten. Other times I'd watch Chloe spin in front of the mirror, her reflection all light and motion, and I'd feel something close to peace. Emily and I don't talk now. I hear from mutual friends that Lily quit dancing, that Emily blames me, that my mother's health is failing. The town talks in whispers, as small towns do, stories with missing pieces, sympathy traded for gossip. I don't correct anyone anymore. Everyone needs a version they can live with. At home, I keep no herbs, no jars. The cupboard where I once stored the thermoses now holds only glasses, clear, identical, harmless. Some nights, when the world is quiet, I pour myself water and sit in the kitchen without turning on the light. The silence feels earned. Chloe's laughter filters down the hallway, a sound so alive it almost hurts. I think about fairness, about how my mother spent her life weighing daughters on invisible scales, trying to balance what love couldn't. Maybe she really believed she was evening things out, teaching us something about humility or chance. But the math of love doesn't tolerate adjustments. It doesn't survive tampering. Once I dreamt I visited her house again. Everything was the same. The jars, the smell, the clock ticking slow. She stood by the stove, stirring something fragrant. "It's just tea," she said, "sweet and safe." I looked into the cup, and the reflection wasn't hers or mine. It was Chloe's, older, unhurt, whole. I woke up crying, without knowing which part was grief. It's been a year now. My mother's probation is nearly over. I haven't visited. I probably won't. Some people think closure is an action, but sometimes it's just endurance, the decision not to reopen what can't be mended. Last week, Chloe brought home another trophy, smaller this time, local competition. She held it up with both hands, eyes shining. "For Grandma," she said softly. I didn't correct her. I just nodded and whispered, "For us." We placed it on the mantel. The metal caught the late light and burned gold for a moment before turning calm again. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the air smells faintly of honey, from candles, from memory, I think of my mother sitting alone, still convinced she meant well. Maybe she did. Maybe that's what makes it worse. Family isn't just what you inherit, it's what you survive. And love, real love, is what you build from what's left. So tell me, if you'd been in my place, would you have done the same? Would you have taken it all the way to court? Or would you have forgiven and moved on? Leave a comment. And if this story reached you, don't forget to subscribe.